The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of ParaX, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Paranormal View right here on the ParaX Radio Network. And I know there's somebody else I was trying to get on here, but we had a few problems of connecting. And with that, tonight we have Barbara Duncan.
I'm here.
And I hope we have somebody else here in just a minute. Maybe. And we do have our guest with us tonight. So, yay! With that, we got the little bug worked out, and we are now on the air. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be with us tonight here on the Paranormal View, and glad that you're listening. And if you're listening from somewhere else around the world, we appreciate you also. Come on over to the ParaX Radio Network. And just click the Join Now button and follow instructions. You'll be in with all these wonderful people. And you can communicate with them and communicate with us and ask us questions, which I'm sure there's going to be a lot tonight. We did have a little problem of getting on air. But hopefully everybody can hear everything good now, so we should be ready to go. And I do have Barbara Duncan with us.
Yep, still here.
And because we got such a great guest, and it's not his first time being with us, but I'm going to let Barbara go ahead and introduce our guest.
Well, like I said, he is a returning guest and very popular, and he is quite a multitasker at that. He's a paramedic, he's a paranormal investigator, he's an author. He's also on television on Haunted Case Files, Haunted Hospitals, Paranormal 911. And he is the author of lots of books: Haunted Healthcare, The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farm, The Black Monk, Haunted Healthcare 2, A Haunting at Farrar, I believe is the name of it, and The Haunting of Asylum 49, and several more books. Please welcome back to the Paranormal View, Richard Estep.
Good evening. Thanks for inviting me back. I appreciate it.
Well, no problem. We always love to have good guests.
And he writes books that scare the heck out of people.
He does do that. I know she was saying you do the Haunted Hospital 49. You get to go there quite often and be one of the ghosts or something in there, scares people.
Well, it's an old hospital, but it's now a full contact haunted house attraction, and it's run by a great bunch of people. Some of them as young as 8 or 9 years old. And so every Halloween, I get the opportunity to go down there with a few friends, and we'll dress up as extras in the haunted house, help scare the living daylights out of the customers, and then when the doors close at midnight, we'll look up and we'll lock ourselves in, and we'll begin a paranormal investigation right then and there.
Now, do you find that because of the adrenaline level of all the participants, that the activity goes up during those off hours?
That's exactly why we pick the Halloween week to do that, actually, because you get thousands of people coming through. All of them are going with one purpose, to get scared. So you get that emotional battery, if you will, charging up. And then it seems that whatever's in the building likes to use that as an energy source in order to help manifest.
Now, the last time you were on, I believe, you hadn't opened up part of the hospital because it was still a working, I believe it was a nursing home at the time, right?
It was a retirement home, yeah, absolutely, a nursing home. And so they moved the residents out a couple of years ago, and my team and I were the first investigators to move in to that wing and carry out some research there, which was a big privilege. It was like getting a toy to unwrap on Christmas morning, not knowing what it was and how it was going to treat us. And Asylum 49 remains my favorite haunted location in the world, hands down.
Well, it's nice because you can actually, because of its proximity to you, you can go back several times and you can start documenting repeating events, right? Are there repeating events?
There are, and proximity is a relative word. I mean, it's in Utah. It's 500 miles away from me, but I make the road trip anyway. And it's as much to see the people there for the sense of family as it is for the paranormal activity. But we do have good baseline records. And so, yeah, we do have the opportunity to go look at how things tend to repeat over time.
And how is the newer part that you're just able to get into? My understanding is that at one time there were shadow figures that people were seeing in the security cameras.
Well, they're all throughout the hospital. Shadow figures have been seen throughout Asylum 49, but yeah, they were seen by nursing staff that worked there back when it was a functional facility. And to this day, it seems that people are still citing them. The other part, the part that is the haunt, tends to be more active, but even so, the newer section, as I call it, is still surprisingly intense. There are still strange things going on over there. There's so much square footage at Asylum 49, well over 100,000 square feet, that it's always a challenge to know where to focus your attention.
Heck yeah. I mean, I understand the security camera system would be beneficial for that. How much stock do you place in long-term security cameras? Because, a lot of times if they're staring at one space too long and you have the old cathode ray tube type, they tend to burn the screen. So you get images overlaying on top of images. They burn in.
They you raise a good point there, and I think I prefer cameras to eyesight. In other words, anything I can record and play back and analyze is something that I prefer to just eyewitness testimony. But to go down that road and answer Kat's question from the chat room, which is related to shadow figures, there tend to be broadly two types. There are the tall adult-sized shadow figures, and then the shorter child-sized ones. It's something that I'm starting to look at differently because of a conversation I had with my friend John Tenney. John's a terrific researcher and a real asset to our field. And John said, we are so culturally biased when it comes to shadow figures here in the Western world because we've all seen countless scary movies in which the shadow figures, are something to be afraid of. We tend to think they're out to scare us. But he said if you look at other cultures, especially Eastern cultures, they also have their shadow figures, but they believe that these are the spirits of loved ones that are coming back to watch over us. And there's a belief in some of those cultures that the reason they appear as shadows is that they are being backlit by the divine light of creation. It's almost as if they're standing in front of this bright searchlight, and that's why they appear as shadows to us. So they're not regarded as scary all around the world. It's something that's kind of unique to us here in the West. And that really opened my eyes to looking at some possible interpretations of shadow figures. I've seen one myself that just knocked my socks off at the Old South Pittsburgh Hospital in Tennessee. It was no more than 8 feet in front of me, and I actually thought it was the silhouette of one of my fellow investigators until I realized there was nobody in that particular part of the building. So it's a very real phenomenon. As to what they are for sure, I think it's still speculation. What do you guys think? And what do the folks in the chat room think?
Well, you're right. It is all perception, and it makes you wonder. Well, I mean, if people can appear as whatever they want to in the afterlife, whether it be a white mist, whether it be a shadow, whether it be black-eyed kids or whatever, it would seem to me it's how they want to present themselves, not necessarily what it is to us. Just like if you meet somebody on the street, how they clothe themselves, how they react is a presentation of themselves, but how we perceive them is more of a presentation of our thinking. So it really is a lot of it psychological interpretation by both the researcher and whoever it is that's projecting.
And of course, both the researcher and everybody else involved brings their own cognitive bias, don't they?
Yeah.
Yes.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, those orbs or whatever, it's in the perception of the person, which is, it's a dust ball or it's Uncle Joe. It's hard to determine what it actually is, which is why data is so important. That's just my opinion.
Everybody else has got one too. As far as I know, I'm not sure that I've ever seen a shadow person yet. So that don't mean that sometime I may not.
Well, I think one of the problems is that they seem to pop up in when you're researching in very dark old buildings, and so you first have to wonder if the eyes are playing tricks, the mind is playing tricks. Yeah. We are wired, cognitively speaking, to want to see the human form in random patterns, and we're also very suggestible.
Correct.
So all it takes is for one person to say, "Did you see that shadow figure at the end of the hallway?" And suddenly everybody's seeing it. So it's kind of a tenuous area of research, as far as I'm concerned.
True.
And we had that happen on the show when we one of the shows was doing a live broadcast. And of course, they were using the older type of cameras with the old pixelated night vision.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the corner, it was starting to pixelate, and it was simply the camera trying to grab onto something to be able to show it. But everybody insisted it was the ghost of a little girl, when in fact it was nothing more than pixelation.
Do you remember where that was at?
It was a bowling alley, and it was Dave. And I cannot remember where it was. Yeah, it was a bowling alley somewhere. But it goes back to that point of perception and what it is that you want to see. And then, of course, I come from the standpoint of too is when was the last time you had your eyes tested, and do you have floaters? And are you seeing that, and are you taking all that into account when you see things, especially out of the corner of your eyes?
You definitely have to do that. Yes. You wonder if you can see things at night. You should be able to see things in the daylight.
Well, I mean, the rods and cones of the eyes work a little differently, don't they? And there's the fact that our night vision is better almost peripherally than it is when we look directly at something. So viewing those things at night makes it slightly more challenging and sometimes more questionable too. Any scientist will tell you that the worst sensor that was ever devised are the human senses. They're the most easily fooled. They're the most subjective. So if you can catch something like that on camera, that's wonderful. And it's been done by a few researchers. I mean, one of the most compelling pictures of a shadow figure I've ever seen was captured by Barry Kling at the Fairfield Inn just outside Gettysburg. He saw nothing at the time, but captured what appears to be a young male peeking around a door frame at him as he was taking photographs.
Barry has the best toys out of anybody in the paranormal, though.
Yeah, I met him and his brother. Matter of fact, it was at Music Hall in Cincinnati. They had an event there, and I got to meet them there and interviewed them on the show, which I thought was really great.
Barry has a brother. He must be a quiet man.
Barry Clean, yeah. Brad and Barry Clean. Yeah.
Hurricane Brad.
Yeah. Now, just let everybody know if you do have questions, you can private chat them to either H. Foister or Ceiling Cat, and we will get those answered. If you're listening from somewhere else and you have questions, you can send a question to theparanormalview@gmail.com, and we will get that answered for you. So, you write a lot of your books on places where you have investigated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how did you come about Gacy's ghost?
Well, it's almost the perfect segue from what you were just talking about. I was doing a convention in Texas last spring in Conroe, Texas, the Bayou City Paranormal Symposium, and I was sitting at a table next to Brad and Barry, and we're friends. We go back a ways, mainly because we have a shared love of ghosts and of Gettysburg, and so we can talk about those two things all day long. And I'd just written a book about a haunted serial killer's house, the Fox Hollow Farm property in Indiana. And so Brad said, I have my own serial killer encounter, and he said, John Wayne Gacy is now my personal nemesis. Well, he made a TV show about it. It's called Strange Curiosity. You can see it on Amazon Prime. It's well worth looking at. And it turns out that John Wayne Gacy is believed to haunt a movie theater in this small town, Illinois. Which, instantly I wanted to know, well, how does that happen? How does one of the most prolific and awful serial murderers in American history end up in a movie theater, right? There was no connection. So the story was that one of Gacy's attorneys owned several of his paintings. John Wayne Gacy painted a number of pictures, primarily of clowns and things of that nature, while he was on death row, which he then sold. And some of them were kept by his attorney, who stored them in a wooden armoire, which is essentially just a cabinet. And the armoire went to our movie theater in Auburn, Illinois, in the care of a gentleman called Robin Terry. Robin and his wife Norma soon began to have strange things happen around the movie theater, which is also their home. So it's a refurbed old movie theater where they live upstairs. And they started to get all this strange stuff going on, so they brought in a couple of mediums. And the medium said, we're getting the name John Wayne. And Robin was like, that's great. How cool is that? The Duke, the king of the Western is haunting my house. And then the medium said, yeah, but why would John Wayne be dressed as a clown? And so it turns out that Gacy seemed to have this attachment to the armoire which had been used to store his paintings, and appears to do so to this day. And when I heard that story, I just had to go look into it myself, which is how the book came about.
So you went and investigated.
In the book, you asked the same question that I asked, which is, the paintings aren't in there now. Why is he still attached to the armoire?
That's a great question. So a lot of people come to the art theater. They get a lot of visitors. If John Wayne Gacy loved anything, it was attention. He was a supreme narcissist, as indeed many serial killers are. So he liked to be the center of the spotlight. He liked people to talk about him. And so as soon as he started to get interaction, as soon as Brad Kling put his story on TV, activity started to increase. And people came over there with the express intent of trying to communicate with John Wayne Gacy, which I think appeals to an ego that big.
That makes really good sense, too, because I remember the stories of the police trying to pin him with those crimes. And he would interact with them all of the time and egg them on, so to speak.
You're right, he did. In fact, he knew he was being tailed. He drove at 90 miles an hour through the streets of Chicago. The cops didn't pull him over for that because they were trying to land him for this much bigger crime, of course. He would go to a bar and then come sit with the detectives tailing him and buy them drinks and dinner, and he would say the creepiest things. when he was asked why do you dress as a clown for public events, he told one of the cops, because a clown can get away with murder. I mean, the sheer arrogance of it. He actually tried. I mean, this really displays Gacy, and I think one of the most understandable ways, if you want to get to the core of the man. This comment does it, but he insisted till his dying day that the 28 bodies that were found underneath his house, it was either 28 or 29, were nothing to do with him. He said a lot of people had access to that crawl space under my house, and then he said, if I'm guilty of anything, it's running a cemetery without a license. I mean, just unbelievable.
Wow.
So that level of hubris, that level of arrogance, I think kind of explains why he would still be showing up at a place like the R Theater today. Whatever your beliefs about the afterlife may be, if there is any form of judgment, then he has a vested interest in delaying that as long as he possibly can.
Oh, sure. And it would also, his arrogance would explain why he's at fists with the Klieg's, one would think.
Well, Brad is one of the most type A individuals you could ever wish to meet. He's a lovely man, but still, he's a full-on guy. And so he was not averse. He's also a family man, so I think that the idea of John Wayne Gacy, just the very idea of what he did, offended Brad, insulted him deeply. And so Brad was not beyond taunting him and provoking him at all. And I had Brad Skype in when I was there. I was up on the balcony at the Art Theater alone in the middle of a thunderstorm, which was about as theatrical as it could get, right? And I had Brad Skyping in and just taunting and ripping into John Wayne Gacy in an attempt to get him to come out and interact. And Brad is kind of like his kryptonite, multiple mediums that have visited the R said John Wayne Gacy loves attention and he detests Brad Kling, which Brad's fine with. He loves that. Brad's rant was so epic, I put it in the book.
Yeah.
I had to put a warning. It's the first time I've ever put a disclaimer in one of my books, like warning, the language in this next chapter, some of the things that are said, you may want to skip this if you're sensitive, because Brad just went nuclear. I mean, like when I was typing it up, I broke the F key on my keyboard.
Ooh. Which leads me to another question, because provocation of a spirit and how to do it correctly and safely so that, I can't imagine that John Wayne Gacy would go after the Klieg brothers. But certainly anybody who was friends with them, he might be trying to do that just to get back at them, wouldn't you think? Yeah, what do you do?
The first thing I'd like to say when it comes to provocation is I don't advocate that 99% of the time. I don't think it's appropriate to use blindly. I think that you should treat spirits with respect as you should treat living people with respect. Essentially, that's what I believe they are, though in a different form. So, but I've made exceptions in a couple of cases, and both of those cases I was dealing with a haunting that centered upon a serial killer. And so if you're the kind of individual that would torture and murder young men or young people, I have no respect for you at all. I have no time for you at all. So I feel fully justified in that case in adopting the harder line. There is no... We run into all these cases where people are scratched and pushed and undergo physical symptoms, but it would have made for a much better scary story if that had been true. But I write the truth. I write about what happens. And we didn't get any of that in the wake of the provocation of John Wayne Gacy at all. So he seems to like to hang out in the shadows quite a lot at the Art Theater. He likes to watch people, and he likes to hear what they're saying about him. So he seems to be very voyeuristic. And he's most commonly encountered in the huge garage, which was the old auditorium, on a balcony that's about 20 to 25 feet up in the air in there.
Wow. I got a question from the chat room, and it's from Tabby. And she wants to know, as an EMT, what is the most unnerving paranormal situation you have encountered to date? And did that situation change the way you look at the afterlife?
Is that from Patty, you said?
No, it's from Tabby.
Caddy, I'm sorry. Caddy, so the answer is none. And I'll tell you why. As a paramedic, I've never had a paranormal experience as a paramedic on the job. And the reason I think is that I am very focused on my scene control, scene management, and I'm very focused on my patient, on assessing them, devising a treatment plan. So I'm working at maximum mental capacity as a paramedic. There could be a troop of headless horsemen tap dancing behind me and I might not notice. I've run into other medics, though, and other field providers, firefighters, and cops. We talk to them on the show Paranormal 911 all the time that do have strange things happen. But for me personally, I'm almost in my own zone or bubble, which a clock starts ticking as soon as I arrive on a 911 scene. And I'm always focused upon that, on moving things forward, stabilizing my patient, and then getting them to definitive care. So I'm sorry, it's not a great answer in the context of the paranormal, but my focus is always the patient and my fellow responders. And I don't have much more bandwidth beyond that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
absolutely, and rather reassuring to that the paramedics are focused that much, and it makes sense. Yeah.
I do have one really bad habit, though. I'll share that with people. And this is true whenever I go into somebody's home. I'm always, if there is a bookcase, I'm always looking at the spines of the books to see what people are reading. Like, I can't help it.
Yeah, I would do the same thing. I would do the same thing with music. Always looking at somebody's record collection or their DVD collections.
Huh.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
You know a person by their
Yeah, that was a great question, though. If there are any more, I'd love to interact more with you guys.
Yes.
Shoot them, and we'll talk about it.
If anybody else has questions, you can private chat them to either H. Foister or Ceiling Cat. We will give them right over and let Richard answer them for you. Okay.
So do you ever worry when you go on to these investigations, though, that I know you may not provoke, but there's always a possibility of attachment or somebody following you home because they didn't like what you said or did? Does that ever concern you, and what steps do you take other than the normal you can't follow me home stuff?
Well, I used to be, and this is a very arrogant thing, but I used to scoff at people that did so-called protection. And for 22 or 23 years of investigation, I never had a problem. So I built up this rather arrogant attitude that, please, it's a waste of time. I don't have to worry. And then something did follow me home. And I ended up having to call a friend of mine, a fellow investigator who's also a Catholic priest. And I'm an agnostic. I used to say I was an atheist, but then my grandmother said, say agnostic because God's got lightning and Darwin's got nothing. And so it was kind of embarrassing to reach out to my friend who's a Catholic priest and say, hey, could you bless my house because something bad came back with me? And after that, I got my moment of hubris. I got humbled as I needed to be. And now I'm pretty, I should say religious, but very diligent about taking protection. So my friend, Father Stephen Widener, taught me how to do some light work. We will do this outside of a location. In fact, I was just at the Bel Air House in Ohio last weekend. We had some pretty intense activity there. And my fellow investigator, Wes Coleman, and I, Wes is with the Correctional Officers Paranormal Society out of Canada, and we were very forceful before we left the property of declaring that nothing was permitted to follow us home or attach to us, that it was going to remain there. And I visualized a circle of white protective light and things of that nature, which, touch wood, have worked so far since then.
Now we have a follow-up question that was Have you ever had, and we've had people on who say that they've had experiences of before they go to an investigation being visited by various spirits in their dream states. Have you ever had that happen?
You know, I haven't, but Katrina Weidman, my friend Katrina, who does Paranormal Lockdown and now Portals to Hell on Travel, Katrina had a dream about the attic of the Bel Air house in the past before she went there, which was kind of interesting to me. And another of my colleagues, Sarah Stream, who works out of Iowa, she's primarily at Malvern Manor and places like that, had what seemed to be a precognitive dream about an old ghost town out in the middle of nowhere, which she's due to visit. And she recognized, after looking at some photographs, one of the building interiors from her dream. So although I've not experienced it myself, some people that I respect immensely have. And I definitely tend to think it's a thing.
Well, dreams tend to be a rehash of the day's events, so to speak. Do you go back and then dream of the investigations and how you would handle it differently? Or have you come to conclusions that you could say, oh, yeah, that's what I dreamt last night, and maybe that's the answer to what was going on there?
I generally don't, but again, I'm not particularly sensitive in that regard. I work with people that are, that claim to be, and some do appear to be. I'm a big fan of not bringing my work home with me, especially after that one incident, you know?
Yeah.
So one thing that Wes Coleman and I were discussing recently was I'm always a little wary anymore of sleeping at a haunted location, because in the past, I've truly immersed myself there by moving into the location for up to a week or two. And you let your guard down when you go to sleep, don't you? In fact, at the R Theatre, the Gacy haunting, I have it on pretty good authority that Brad Kling's camera crew slept with the lights on when they were sleeping in the building, which sounds, you know, it's easy to scoff at that kind of thing until it's midnight and you are in that place alone, right? But I think we're more open in that dream state. We're more open to what might be there, and we're also, to a degree, more vulnerable to something opportunistic that might try and come in. So I'm always leery anymore about sleeping at a haunted location. I did it at Asylum 49 when they opened the new wing. I was in the most active room, and I spent a couple of nights in that room alone. And it's not an experience I care to repeat.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Now, what's interesting, though, Henry, is I couldn't tell you how much of that is purely psychological. You know, the truth is that your mind plays tricks. And
I believe that.
Talking about hubris and arrogance again a little bit, when Cammie Anderson, one of the owners of the hospital and my co-author also, she called me and said, hey, the new wing is going to be available in February. You're going to be the first team to come in. Which room do you want? And I just said, you know, well, the most haunted one, obviously. And so I made that decision sitting in the armchair I'm talking to you from now, noon, bright sunlight, you know, drinking some tea, dog sitting at my feet, my most comfortable place in the world. And it's easy to say, oh, yeah, give me the most haunted room. Now, if this were the movie of my life, we would cut to me at 1 a.m. in this hospital bed in which who knows how many people have died in that room, thinking, why was I stupid enough to ask for this? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Because every creak and groan, even as a seasoned investigator, your mind does play tricks, especially when you're alone. And you do have to guard against it.
Yes.
And the truth is that no matter what your age and no matter how mature you may or may not be, there's that part inside all of us that's still 5 years old and scared of the dark, especially when you've heard stories of tall black figures with red glowing eyes that have terrified patients and staff members in the room you're trying to sleep in.
Was you actually trying to sleep, or were you trying to stay awake and investigate?
So I would investigate until the wee small hours of the morning, and then would try and get some shut-eye, because you can only go for so long. And I was sleeping with one eye open. I just could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. Now, again, how much of that is psychological? How much of that is biased because of the stories I'd heard about that room? What I would like to have done, and this would have been the smart play, would be to take someone who knows nothing about the history of the room, put them in there, and not tell them anything and see what they come up with.
Yeah, it wouldn't be me.
I also don't know that it would be entirely ethical. So,
Yeah, well, you have to think about it too from the standpoint of while it was a working hospital, there were patients who were put in that room, and they may not have seen the darn thing.
exactly, absolutely true. So the mind, I think, plays tricks on us, and I really think that I would love to do an experiment someday where I take a control group of people and put half of them in a haunted part of a building and half of them in a part that isn't reputed to be haunted, and then see who experiences what without any kind of bias, without any information up front.
That's
a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. If you're investigator and you're going to be in a place that's purportedly to be haunted, your mind is already looking for something that you can make out that, oh, did you hear that or whatever? And it might just be the house settling from the heat of the day or something. But yet every time you hear something, you start hollering, did you hear that? Like it's a spirit or something.
Yeah, definitely. There is a bias that we all have toward that. I would love to take 5 random houses, one of which has a reputation for being haunted that I didn't know about. I would love to spend 5 nights in 5 different houses and see if I can pick out the haunted one. That would be more of a valid experiment, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, you often, and psychologically makes sense too. You're up all night. You're trying to talk to the spirits. You're trying to get their attention. And then when you try to fall asleep, of course, your mind is still trying to get their attention. You have no idea whether your mind is simply wish fulfillment or they're actually now paying attention.
Yeah, that's a very good point also. But you certainly open yourself up more when you do sleep. You drop those psychic shields or barriers that we all have to a greater or lesser degree, and also your defenses, I believe, are degraded the more fatigued you get. When you do just a 3-day investigation, even 72 hours, by the end of it, you're running on caffeine, and you've eaten. It's interesting. Paranormal investigators do not eat healthily on investigations. They're fueled by caffeine, junk food, and enthusiasm. And so I think that by that last day, you're so tired. You've eaten a whole bunch of stuff that's bad for you, and it all plays a role in degrading your normal psychic defense system, or call it what you will, which makes you, again, more open, which is a good and a bad thing.
Well, let's talk about shows I guess there's like Paranormal Lockdown and a few that do actually try to sleep in the areas and by themselves in various locations. And, I'm trying to think if there's any real relevance to, other than entertainment, to an investigation to do that.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for immersion. One of the benefits is, and Henry alluded to this just a few moments ago, every building has its own personality, and I don't mean anything metaphysical by that. It has the way in which it tends to cool down and contract at the end of a warm day, for example, and the various creaks and groans you get because of that. The way that air flows through a building, the way that construction behaves inside a building. It's important to understand all that, and I really began to study that because as a firefighter, I was always taught to study building construction because buildings are what get firefighters killed.
Yes.
It's a part of building construction that you can never know too much about that subject. So there is a great book I recommend to any would-be paranormal investigator. It's called Brannigan's Construction for the Fire Service. And it really is all about how buildings behave and the way they're put together. And it's one of those books you would not really think a paranormal investigator might find useful, but it's very useful, So once you're in a building for 24, 48, 72 hours, you start to realize that at about 8 p.m., that's when the building will begin to creak and pop, and that's perfectly normal. And that, in turn, should better prepare you for when events are happening that are not part of the building's usual routine, that seem atypical of the pattern.
Sure.
So familiarity is helpful sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very much so. Like what a solenoid valve sounds like in an air conditioning unit, and what dried out pipes smell like, which is sulfur.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it makes sense to have, and I think you do this from what I can tell from the descriptions you have of your team. Mm-hmm. Which is to have a wide range of people there with varying experiences and different backgrounds where you can see a lot of that.
I'm very fortunate in the company I keep. I have a lot of friends that are very, very skilled in diverse areas. For example, my friends Linda and Jason. Linda is an imaging technician in a hospital. Jason is a pharmacist. So Jason has a great knowledge of the way that medications behave, because so many medications have side effects like hallucinations, Sure. My friend Erin has a background in mental health, which again is very important when it comes down to dealing with witnesses. But I also have engineers that I work with, people that are engineers. My friend Catlin has a doctorate, and she teaches religious studies, so she has comparative religions as part of her background. So I'm blessed with a diverse group of friends and colleagues. Wes, as I mentioned earlier, is a corrections officer, which, although it may not seem directly applicable, he's got a very interesting personality and skill set that he brings to the job as well. So I think having a diverse team of professionals is a huge, huge benefit to me. And I'm, whenever I write or whenever I'm working on a project, I'm very aware that I'm always standing on their shoulders, that I would not have any kind of writing career today without them.
And what I loved about the way that you're writing this stuff, especially this book in particular, the Gacy book, is that you don't over-amplify it. You don't sensationalize it. The investigation is pretty much what it is, which is sometimes sheer drudgery. Sometimes you have to go back out, regroup, come back in, and you have to spend more than one, event-filled hour with commercials to really do an investigation.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I've always disliked about paranormal reality TV is the kind of almost suspiciously convenient way in which things build and build and build to a big climax, which that's the way Hollywood movies work, that's the way a novel works, but it's not the way a real life investigation works. One of the most haunted houses in England, the Black Monk House, 30 East Drive, Pontefract, I moved in there with my colleagues Jason and Linda and Charlie, and fellow investigators Gaynor and Leslie, and within 1 hour, we had a very impressive piece of evidence, a mirror that fell or jumped from the wall and smashed itself while the house was locked up tight. And then we had a couple of days where almost nothing happened. And then we started to get some more stuff on the fourth day, but our most impressive activity came kind of almost right out of the gate. And I think that makes for bad storytelling, but I'm not in the profession of trying to spin a tale here, you know what I mean? I'm trying to take people along on the investigation to experience it along with me. I do believe that one of the fortunate things I can do with my books is to cut out some of that drudgery, as you mentioned. So I can cut out some of the hours of endless waiting, and they can pass in a paragraph. So what took my team and I 48 hours could take the reader a paragraph, and then we're on to something new. But I think that you always need to remind the reader, hey, we invest a lot of time waiting for just a few minutes of something fascinating. And I hope that my books do convey that.
They do. And they're very interesting. You investigate just about all the places that you write books about.
Mm-hmm. I do. I find that I'm drawn to stories and to people. So for example, the book I'm currently working on, I have a book about serial killers, which is purely about serial killers and not my personal involvement with them. But I'm working on a book about Bodmin Jail in Cornwall, England. And I was fascinated by the way that this prison, when people were hanged there, their bodies would be buried inside the walls of the prison.
Really?
And they're now renovating, part of the abandoned prison, and they're turning it into a hotel.
Oh, wow.
And my first thought was, what are the spirits going to make of that, right?
Right.
And instantly, a story idea like that, it just jumps out at me and grabs me, and I have to know what's going to happen. And because, like so many other people, I'm pretty egotistical in a lot of ways. I insert myself into the story. What happens if I grab some professionals, and what happens if we go and move in together and see what takes place? So that's how it is. With the Gacy's Ghost book, does a serial killer really haunt this movie theater, and how's he going to react when I move in with a few trusted colleagues, and then we Skype in one of the most aggressive antagonists you could possibly give him? That has all the makings of a good drama, I think. It just happens to be true.
Wow. Well, you went to the Fairfield Inn. Which is just outside of Gettysburg. We got to go there and do our show from there. We had a big group that come with us.
It's such a good place, isn't it, Henry?
Yes. It was very interesting, and the history with it. I didn't spend the night there. A lot of the other people that was with us did. And some of them had some stories about some of the things that took place. Some of the group went down into the basement. I didn't do that because I don't do very well on stairs anymore. So I try to stay away from them as much as possible.
Henry just doesn't like basements.
No, I don't like basements.
To be fair, we didn't get a lot down in the basement, but we did get spiders. So you may have made a good call there, Henry.
Yeah. But, I'm not one of those people that will go sit in a room by myself. If I'm with somebody, that's fine. But a lot of the people that goes with me, they'll generally say, "Don't get between Henry and the door."
Oh, right, okay.
I have never had to run out of a place. I get lots of EVPs and different things like that, but I've never had anything or felt or seen anything that was not a good spirit. So.
Well, and as Kat's pointing out in the chat room, it's harder to do a dude run up the basement stairs. as Brian Harnwell would say, dude run.
Yeah.
Poor Brian. He's taken so much stick for that over the years.
Oh, I know he has.
Aside from being able to control the situation in the room by yourself, I'm not sure how much good it does to be alone, because there's no backup in there in case something does happen.
Well, I agree with you, and to piggyback on that even more, the problem then becomes you are the sole observer. So no matter what you might see, unless you're fortunate enough to record it, you have one person's anecdote. If two people see something or experience something and can agree on it, there's some corroboration there at least, and there's none of that if you're on your own. So I'm not a big advocate of exploring alone. And plus, for me, one of the big appeals of paranormal research is it's very social. Even when nothing happens, I get to spend time with some of the coolest people.
That's true.
And that alone makes it worth it. And we do it in some very strange and dark places.
And if anything does happen, then you've got somebody else who can corroborate it.
Exactly that. It's a no-lose situation.
Right.
Well, it's the Schrodinger's friends theory, I guess it's called, where, you can have different people in there, and if you become part of the investigation. So even if you have two or more people in there observing the same thing, you at least have hopefully camera backup, audio backup, for another person to be able to say, yes, it did occur.
Yeah, if possible. I mean, we see instances in which people experience those kind of things and nothing is recorded. That does happen too. But it increases your chances for sure of having some kind of corroborative evidence. So I agree with you, Henry. I'm not one for sitting alone either. Every so often I'll do it. I spent half an hour at the Monroe house, for example, locked in the basement, alone in the house, which was just really an attempt to draw something out. But for the most part, I like to be in the company of my colleagues because they're also my friends.
And there's been times where it'd be a couple of us in a room, and we'd have our recorders going, and one would pick up an EVP on a recorder, and the other person didn't catch it on theirs.
Absolutely.
I've seen that
and
a
then
lot.
you get those other times when you both catch it, and you're at slightly different points in the room. We had one experience. This was very cool. I was with my friend Stephen, the priest I spoke about earlier. We were investigating the Cage, an old witches' prison in St. Osyth, England.
Right.
And we'd been in the house maybe half an hour. We were just walking around with the owner. And I'd asked, we were on the upstairs landing, and I'd asked if there were any lights up there. And I was running an EVP recorder I had a bracelet EVP recorder. And Stephen, who was standing maybe 5 or 6 feet away from me, was holding a handheld. And we clearly recorded an old woman's voice saying, yes, it's in the bathroom, which is true. That's where the light switch was. But Stephen's EVP and mine was subtly different because his was missing a couple of words.
Huh.
So, that alone tells you something interesting, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Of course, none of us heard anything at the time.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's also cool to say that I've done jail time with a priest.
And a witch.
Yeah, and witches, you're right.
I think it's about time for us to take a quick little break. Just remember that when we go out on break, you won't hear anything, but your mic will be live, so you can just mute your mic until you hear me come back talking. Sound okay?
Good.
All right. With that, I'm going to let Barbara take us out on a quick break. It's be about 3, maybe 4 minutes, and I'll be right back. Barbara?
Okay, folks, you're listening to the Paranormal View here on ParaX Radio Network with our very special guest tonight, Richard Estep, author of the new book, Gacy's Ghost, Haunting the Spirit of a Serial Killer. And we will be right back after a few messages.
Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making ParaX part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, ParaX.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight. Those listening in the chat room and those listening from around the world, we appreciate all of you. And want to welcome back Barbara Duncan.
I'm still here.
And speaking of guests from around the world, where do we have guests at?
They're all over the United States tonight, Canada, the United Kingdom, and unknown back, so maybe Mr. Gacy is listening in.
Oh, he could be. He could be. And we want to welcome back Richard Estep.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. We're always glad to have great guests. So you're always welcome. Just remember that. Anytime you want to come on and chit-chat, that's fine with us.
Thank you. That's kind of you.
We was talking about the Fairfield Inn, and that was in one of your books.
Mm-hmm.
You also, I was looking through the list of them, and this one caught my eye. I haven't read it yet, but it was The Dead Below the Haunting of Denver Botanic Gardens. What is supposed to be below the Botanic Gardens?
Well, really, we know what's below the Denver Botanic Gardens. Back towards the end of the 19th century, when Denver was much smaller than it is today, the original city cemetery was there. As Denver started to grow and we started to see some urban sprawl, what happened was that the the city administration decided they would like to see a cemetery a little further away from the center of Denver. So they decided they were going to move the cemetery. And what they did was that they told people that had their loved ones buried there, hey, you've got a few weeks to move them yourself, and if you don't do that, then we are going to basically remove all the tombstones, we're going to flatten everything, we're going to put down grass, and we're going to make it a park, which is what they did. Now, they hired a construction company to move some of the bodies, and this became quite the scandal in Denver at the time, because the employees, the contractors, were pulling up the coffins, and in order to save money and time, they would just throw the bones together into one single coffin. They would aggregate them. So you get 3 skulls and 2 rib cages and 7 arms and so on and so forth. They would just mash them all in together. And this quite understandably outraged the people. So they stopped this contractor working. They fired them and just said, you know what, we're going to start over. We're just going to make this a park. So there are several thousand sets of human remains underneath what's now the Denver Botanic Gardens and its neighboring park, Cheeseman Park, to this day. And when I had a chance to visit the gardens and talk to the staff and management team there, they regularly have strange occurrences, unsurprisingly, going on. Their car park, for example, the parking lot just across the street, was buried on the old Catholic part of the cemetery. And when they broke ground on that, they would regularly have to call law enforcement because they kept finding skulls and various other pieces of human remains. So staff at the Botanic Gardens have heard disembodied voices, seen strange things, felt strange things. Telephones, the old-style bell telephones inside the house, which are no longer connected and haven't been for many years, have been heard ringing inside that building by managers and people that, generally don't believe in this kind of stuff. So they were kind enough to give me access along with my team of investigators. And so we were locked in there for several nights. And that is the crux of the book you're talking about, The Dead Below, because truly that's what's below the Botanic Gardens, the dead.
So did you get any good evidence?
We did, or it would have been a really thin book, wouldn't it? Which happens from time to time. There are a number of books I haven't written because I've been to places that seem like they would be terrific fodder for a story, and there just was no evidence. There was nothing to write about. So we got several things. I mean, primarily we got EVPs that were genuinely creepy. One was that we were in the basement, and once you're in the basement of the Botanic Gardens, you are actually below the ground, obviously. So if you think about that for a minute, once you get beyond the walls of the building, there are coffins in the ground, kind of all around you. Mm-hmm. And one of my colleagues had asked the question, where are we right now? And had gotten a voice back that said, in a mass grave.
Really?
Which genuinely sent my hackles up. That was really quite chilling, Yeah. But we recorded EVPs of a woman speaking upstairs in the Waring house. Probably my favorite moment, because you can't write comedy like this, was that I want to say it was our 4th or 5th night, and we were meeting the security guards, and one of the security guards in the past had quit, very abruptly in the middle of the night, and I was never able to figure out why. Had some strange experience. But this young lady was fairly new to the job, and she said, "Oh, you're the ghost people, huh?" She said, "I would love to have a paranormal experience." And I said, "Well, you're in the right place. You keep working here, there's a chance you will." And she said, "I would just love that." And as she's speaking to us, we're carrying our equipment cases through the gardens to the main manor house, the Waring house, where we were spending the night. And she said, I everything is locked up. I'm going to let you in. I closed down earlier on tonight when the last people left. I switched off the lights. And just as she said that, we turned around a corner, and there was the house, and half the lights in the house were on. And she went, no. You know what? I'll unlock the door. You guys call the police if you need any help, okay? And so I've never seen somebody do such a quick 180 in my life. She went from, this whole ghost thing is cool, I've seen it on TV, to, oh, this is where I work. And now she knew that she had locked up. She knew that she had switched out the lights. This is a competent young lady, you know? And she ran into that moment that you sometimes get with people in this field where maybe they're kind of skeptical, you know, maybe they're open to the possibility, but they haven't had that one experience where when it happens to you personally as an individual, it changes your whole worldview. You know what I mean?
It's like that uh-oh moment.
Yeah, if you're a religious person, if you're a Christian, you might say it's a road to Damascus moment, right? But you watch somebody, finally it sinks in that this stuff happens and it's real and it's interested in you. And I've never seen a security person depart so quickly in my life. So, bless her. We never saw her again for the rest of the night, and the day shift came and unlocked us the following morning.
Well, now, what has been, I would say, you probably don't get scared easy, but what is the most scariest place that you've actually been in?
Well, I mean, it really depends. I mean, on the one hand, I would say that fear is not entirely... I've been afraid. I'll give you a good example of that room in Asylum 49. You know, that was pretty scary to me, even though nothing concrete was happening. So a lot of the time it's psychological.
Right.
It's your own fears, I think, that are preying on you. But I've also been to a few scary places. I mean, the Villisca axe murder house, which I'm also working on a book about. Just knowing what happened in that house, the fact that an entire family was murdered by a man with an axe, their own axe, as it happened, and the killer was never caught. I mean, that is kind of an awful and very creepy place to spend the night, just knowing what happened there. Fox Hollow Farm, knowing that so many young men were murdered in the basement, and then their remains were burned and mulched in the woods directly behind the house. That's the same deal. You know, you could just go to some of the most awful places sometimes, and it definitely brings a degree of fear with it. But mostly fear is connected with the unknown. Fear lessens when you understand certain things. So I think the more you educate yourself on the tools, techniques, and craft of paranormal research, I think that the more it diminishes fear.
Well, I mean, a lot of us have had that moment or just grew up thinking that, oh, yeah, of course spirits are around us all the time. When was that moment for you when you realized that, oh, yeah, this stuff is real?
Well, I think that I grew up fascinated with this. I grew up in a house my grandparents owned that they told me stories about that was supposedly haunted, which I never had any evidence of that other than the testimony of my aunts, my uncles, and my grandparents. So, you know, it sent me on this road to the library, first of all, where I was really wanting to check out every single book I could on ghosts and hauntings. I just became fascinated with it, with the paranormal. And growing up in the 70s as a kid, I also remember Halloween was not a big thing in England. I mean, it is now, but it was seen as a very almost exclusively American holiday back then. It wasn't something that was, you know, widely celebrated, I don't think, or at least not where I lived. But I just found that the ghost stories that I could read about kept me enthralled and kept me wanting these answers. And it was only when I became a grown adult, went to college and then started doing some research with a local group that I began to have testable, objective experiences for myself. And the one that really, really swung me, I think, from, yeah, I pretty much believe this to this absolutely happens. We were investigating a private residence, and it was a poltergeist case, a single mom and her children. And I remember that her brother had been staying with them for a while, and she had found some occult symbols that he'd been writing in his room, and he'd been reading a lot of material like the Satanic Bible and things of that nature. And that's when the disturbances had begun. And so we worked on this case, and we didn't get much in the way of evidence, but throughout the night, we would be in the living room of this very small, easily controllable house. We'd locked all the doors, we'd sealed all the windows. There was no way somebody could have gotten in past us. And the living room was next to the kitchen. And about every 45 minutes to an hour, because we're British, we would send someone in to go make the tea to keep us awake, you know? And this would be about 1995, 1996. And one of my colleagues, 2 o'clock in the morning, went through to go put on the teapot and just kind of exclaimed, you know, whoa. And we all went in, and the cutlery drawer had been pulled out, and the knives, forks, spoons had been taken out of the cutlery drawer, and they'd been kind of laid out on the side on one of the countertops. And there was, no matter how I twisted my brain, there was no way I could explain it rationally, you know? The seals on the door which led out of the kitchen to the backyard were still intact from the inside. I know nobody had gotten past us because we were sitting in front of the only other door that led into the kitchen. And the other thing that struck me was it had been done completely silently. We hadn't heard any jingling or clinking of silverware. So how do you do that? How do you get access to a locked room where one of the doors is being watched? Oh, and also there was a security light outside that was motion triggered. So if you approached the back door from outside, security light would go on. And how do you do that? How do you remove all of these knives, forks, and spoons in complete silence without leaving a physical trace of your entry and then get out again? There comes a point where the rational explanation is more unbelievable than the paranormal one, if that makes sense. You have to jump through more hoops for a quote unquote, you know, sensible explanation than to say this is paranormal in nature. And that was my big defining moment.
And where was this place at?
It was just an ordinary residence. It's in my hometown. Well, actually near my hometown, a place called Loughborough. Again, never did explain it away. You know, never did explain it. So it was just my first exposure to something that I could not account for.
Would it have an entrance into the kitchen, like from a hidden door or something?
This is a very small house, and British houses of this type are all laid out the same way. After the Second World War, there was, thanks to some redesign that the German Air Force had done on a national level.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
To put it politely, the British government had to build a million houses or something of that nature, and they called them prefab houses, prefabricated, you know, in the same way that every McDonald's is prefabricated today, right? These buildings come in a big kit, and they just throw them up wherever they're at. Well, in the same way, that's how these houses were. So they were all laid out with a pretty much identical floor plan. And so, you know, there was no way in or out of that room. You would have either had to go past us or come in through the back door, triggering a security light, unlock the back door silently, open it silently, and then be able to get out after replacing the seals we put on the doors. It was physically impossible.
Wow. There's stuff like that, you know, I would just be flabbergasted. I mean, I wouldn't be scared, but I'd be just like you, trying to figure out how could something like that happen. There's got to be something to this spirit-wise. So that's kind of things that I get interested in.
What were the other types of manifestations this poltergeist was causing? Do you remember?
Well, perhaps most disturbingly, whenever the mom would take a shower and then would come try to leave the bathroom, the door would be pulled from the other side, pulled closed. And this would happen even when her children weren't in the house, when the house was empty, almost as if something did not want to let her out. So that was a little disturbing, and that's why she'd finally reached out. And this was a few years before the big media explosion of ghost hunting shows. So Most Haunted hadn't aired in the UK, Ghost Hunters hadn't aired in the States. So really there were very few paranormal teams nationally that you could call in the UK, you know. You could try calling the police, and they would generally refer you to someone like us. And it was that piece of phenomena, the door being held closed, which finally made her reach out for help, which made her afraid in her own home. The rest of it was the fairly typical objects being moved, unexplained pools of water turning up throughout the house when there was no pet. You know, pet urine is one of the first things I think about, but There was no pet to account for it. And you also have this pressure cooker situation you often see in poltergeist cases of a family that's breaking up and undergoing a great deal of emotional stress, plus children who are growing, and at least one is heading towards puberty. That's the classic perfect storm, isn't it, for a poltergeist outbreak?
Sure.
And that's before we add in the brother that decides he's going to experiment with the occult.
Huh. Wow.
I was thinking there wasn't a lot, especially even in the news. The only one I can think of would have been the Enfield poltergeist case.
Yeah, Enfield, and also I encourage people, well, I'm biased, of course, but Enfield was one of my favorite cases. I read Guy Lyon Playfair's book, Growing Up, This House is Haunted. If you haven't read it, I recommend everybody read that book. It's one of the best documents of a haunting I've ever seen. Enfield's a controversial case. There are many that insist the whole thing was a fraud, a hoax. I personally don't believe that, because the investigators that work so hard on it, I trust their integrity, and they have a good reputation, and did some very solid foundation science. But the Black Monk of Pontefract case, I'm very attached to that because I lived in that house for 6 days and nights and wrote a book about it called, you might be surprised, The Black Monk of Pontefract. Mm-hmm. That is also a very similar case which occurred in the late 60s. What was unique about it, though, was that most poltergeist cases burn out very quickly. And I always refer to the poltergeist phenomenon as the shooting star of the paranormal world. You know, it burns very brightly, very fiercely, but it's gone relatively quickly.
Right.
Whereas the Black Monk House in Pontefract is active 60 years after the initial poltergeist outbreak took place.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, that is not normal.
No. Wow.
Well, it's definitely atypical, and of course it tells you there's something more than a poltergeist case going on.
Sure. I remember reading from the late Colin Wilson, his book called The Occult, and he was questioning what poltergeist activity was, and I cannot remember the other person's name. Basically said it's like an energy ball, and they're playing kick the ball with this energy, and they're just kicking it back and forth.
Yeah, the psychic football theory. And Colin actually wrote the book Poltergeist, a study of destructive hauntings, and that was built around the Black Monk House. Colin was the first investigator in the late 60s, early 70s to document the Black Monk haunting. He did all of the initial research and documentation into that case. So I very much owe him a great debt of gratitude. He did a good job. I think I disagree with a couple of his conclusions, but he interviewed the family directly at the time and spent a lot of time bringing that story to light. It was national and international news back in the late 60s. People were camping out outside that house at night. It was crazy because it had such a fearsome reputation. And Colin did a great job of recording it for posterity.
And oddly enough, he also had a fascination with serial killers.
He did, didn't he? Colin Wilson was one of my favorite writers. I would love to have met him, and I'm really sad that I'll never get to. Not this side of the veil, anyway.
Yeah.
You never can
He
tell.
wrote this absolutely fascinating book called The Mind Parasites, which still inspires me today about telekinesis and the human mind being able to perform a lot more than we think we can do. Mm-hmm. And poltergeist might be part of that as well. How much of this, the hauntings, do you come across that you think actually might be human, living human projections as opposed to actual spiritual activity?
Well, that's a great point, because when you look at the original SPR, the Society for Psychical Research studies that they did 120 years ago or thereabouts, Phantasms of the Living was a well-documented study, and they found that many people see the apparitions of those who are not dead, who are perfectly well, alive and well. We I think, have a bias now where we tend to think ghost equals dead person, don't we? You know, I've always thought that words like ghost and haunting are very similar to words like cancer, and I hate to make that correlation, but what I mean is that cancer is an umbrella term for a family of diseases. You know, cancer is not one thing. It's really an umbrella description. And so you're describing kind of a spectrum of pathologies. And when you say haunting, on the one end of that spectrum, you have something like the residual recordings. You know, I was fortunate enough to record the sound of cannon fire at Gettysburg, at Pickett's Charge, Henry, for example.
Yes.
That's 100% residual. I don't truly believe that there were the spirits of artillerymen still firing all these years later. I think it's a type of natural recording.
Right.
But at the other end of that spectrum of a haunting, you have these intelligent communications which will ask and answer questions and sometimes interact with you on request.
Yes, I've had that.
So, and I think that phantoms or phantasms of the living fit into that spectrum somewhere in the middle. And there are many well-documented cases of people seeing somebody who was still alive at the time who was not aware of them. They almost acted like they were a hologram.
Right.
You know? And the other type of apparition you don't hear of much anymore, but was extremely well documented, is the crisis apparition. A lot of this came out of the First World War, when you would have mothers at home whose sons were dying on the battlefield, and they either saw their son and thought that he had physically come home, or they heard his voice and heard him calling out to them as the young man was hundreds of miles away, you know, breathing his last.
Right.
So the crisis apparition is also very well documented, historically speaking.
Oh, and Kat points out very much in the chat room, too. Yeah, there is astral projection, and there is bilocation. I mean, the Stargate program in the United States pretty much proved that you could remote view in, and it's possible that some people are seeing remote viewers, maybe.
I certainly wouldn't discount that. And another one is the whole interdimensional theory. I had a strange experience, or I should say, my colleague Sean Crusher had a strange experience once. We were at the Outlaws and Lawmen's Museum in Cripple Creek, Colorado, which is an old jail. And I was in one of the cells with another investigator standing in the doorway, so I could not possibly have gotten out. And Sean saw me at the same time standing outside on the cell block. And when he came into the cell and saw me there, he was quite shaken because he knew I could not physically have gotten past him and into the cell. But he swore he knows what I look like. He didn't make a mistake. It wasn't a trick of the light. He saw me. He said, "You were dressed identically except your shirt was different." Now, anyone that knows me knows that my uniform in daily life, because I have no dress sense at all, is pretty much the same type of BDU 511 tactical pants that a lot of people in my profession wear. I own like 10 pairs of those. So I'm always wearing those, some kind of boots, and then whatever T-shirt I managed to throw on. And Sean had said, "Your shirt was different," but that was it. It was definitely you. You were taking photographs of the cell block. And he never gave it a second thought. You know, he truly just believed I was standing out there. And so some have called that a doppelganger experience.
Right.
But then Dave Schrader, if you're familiar with Dave, raised a great point. He said, what if at some point in the future you go back to that jail and you happen to be wearing what Sean saw you wearing? Could this be a time slip? Could this be you from a nearby pocket universe, which, you know, it interacted, it kind of merged with ours for a moment. And so in some parallel universe, there's another Richard Estep who's also investigating this night, but he's dressed slightly differently and he's not in a cell. And that's what Sean caught sight of, you know? It really, 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 I'm laughing because I'm reading Nathaniel's comment in the chat room. Tell your girlfriend not to give you crap, Nathaniel, right? I have no dress sense, and that's very cool. It really made me look at alternative explanations. Because, you know, Sean's a reliable observer. He's an experienced investigator. So I trust him when he says that he saw me. How else do we explain it? Because I'm not, you know, touch wood, dead. So we're left with a number of different possible theories as to how he could have seen me. And I don't know what the right answer is. It's one of those strange things in the paranormal that keeps us all coming back for more, isn't it?
Yes. Things like that happen.
Absolutely, they do.
That and physics.
Yes.
You just don't know. I'm leaning more towards we're in a multi-universe, and at some point they merge a little bit maybe. And so you can find images of yourself. That's what doppelgangers always were.
I feel very confident in saying that I don't know. One of my favorite things...
Me too, yeah.
I'll try not to soapbox, but one of my favorite things I've learned from the paranormal is that the more certain somebody is that they know the answer, the less I like them or trust them. You'll run into those people, and this is generally true in life, unless you're dealing with a mathematician, because math is nothing but cold logic. A degree of certainty is almost essential to keep you intellectually honest.
Yeah.
And so I love the people in the paranormal field who say, I'm not sure what's going on. Here's what I think. Here's my very best guess, my very best reasoning. But I don't know for sure. I love those people. Those people are my people. And in this case, there are so many cool theories as to that would explain what had been going on, ranging from Sean hallucinated me, although he's not prone to hallucinations, right, to alternate universes and everything in between. I just love the fact that I will probably never know how he saw what he saw that night.
Right.
And also every time I see Sean now, he pokes me to make sure it's actually me.
Well, that's just it. I mean, with science, 5 years from now, things are going to be all different. Because every time you learn something, every time something new comes out, you're learning something different. And sometimes it does. It either reinforces or it changes the way we have to look at the universe.
Absolutely. Linda's talking in the chat room. Linda is one of my colleagues, the imaging technician I talked about. Hey, Linda, it's great to know you're out there. At Waverly Hills, she heard me, she and a fellow investigator, so not just her, heard my voice down in the death tunnel, which, if you don't know about Waverly Hills Sanatorium, it's a tunnel that they would use to take the bodies of deceased patients down to the hearse. And she heard my voice very clearly coming up from that tunnel, which is fine, but I was on the roof at the opposite end of the building at the time. There's no way I could have been down in this. My voice could have filtered down there.
No.
And both of them heard it.
Well, yeah, and you come, right, two witnesses, and then you come to the whole question of, well, was there some kind of spirit that was imitating me? Because you do get that, especially when you use spirit boxes. Have you guys or your listeners that use spirit boxes like the SB7 or 11, have you heard anything come through that sounded like you or sounded like it was imitating you?
I never have, no.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear from the chat room if folks have had that.
Some people are saying yes.
Yeah. Well, I've been wanting to get one of the spirit boxes, but I haven't got one yet.
Gotcha. I mean, so it's easy to jump to the conclusion that somebody is making fun of you, which is still pretty cool. But then you get to those weird theories that say maybe this is another version of you somehow communicating from elsewhere, which is even stranger, and that would horrify my wife because she would tell you one of me is bad enough. But if we can, we're talking with multiple instances of ourselves or ourselves from a future point in time, it just boggles the mind. And one of the things I've always disliked about conventional science, because I love to read about physics and the physical sciences, is the certainty that comes from so many scientists that the stuff we are interested in cannot happen, and therefore it does not happen. If you look at the number of times throughout the history of the physical sciences when scientists have declared that something cannot happen and then it does, a great example is the sound barrier. It was believed that it was physically impossible to break the sound barrier. Right. The greatest minds in the world would have told you, you cannot break the sound barrier. It is a hard stop. Well, we did. And I also believe we're now told that about the light barrier and the speed of light. I also believe that one day we're going to figure that out too, because humans are very resourceful creatures. And we are terrific as a species in the long run anyway at working our way around or blasting through these barriers. So it does bug me that that traditional science is not more open to this. I would love to see actual physicists going to these locations and doing field research under lab conditions. Unfortunately, though, it's the kiss of death, isn't it, for an academic?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's the problem.
And there are a lot of them that are interested in the paranormal, but they're pretty much ostracized by science. Charles Tart, for example, is very well known for his work in the parapsychology area. But he's known for his work there, but ostracized from getting any sort of science degree or science recognition anymore because of his paranormal work.
And it's unfortunate because with science, you have such a large base of people reporting these experiences. And the truth of it is that if just one of these accounts throughout all of history, if just one of them is correct, you have a phenomenon that needs to be studied because the laws of physics don't quite work the way we think they do.
Correct.
Right? Just one of them. Yeah. When I talk to skeptics, and I try and do so very respectfully because I'm skeptical myself. To me, though, skeptic just means show me the evidence. It doesn't mean I don't believe you no matter what you show me. I'm just skeptical to the point of, okay, it's a pretty crazy claim. Let's see the evidence to support it. Well, I always do like to talk to skeptics and say, if you're going to tell me that none of this stuff happens, none of it's real, you have to be right 100% of the time. We have to be right just once, and then you have something that needs further investigation.
Yeah. I was at a nursing home one time. It's no longer there. It's been closed and torn down. But we were investigating in there, and we were down like in what was the day room. It was at the end of a hallway, and we'd been talking, and all of a sudden, we got silent, and all of a sudden, the recorder picks up a little girl saying, "Please wake up."
Yeah.
And we don't know if somebody fell asleep, she's trying to get him to wake up, or if somebody had died and she was trying to get him to wake up. Don't know. There wasn't anything there, but it picked a little girl up. And stuff like that has always fascinated me.
Yeah, I do find that fascinating also. We recorded at the Villisca Axe Murder House the sound of a child giggling. And the only three people in that house were three middle-aged men. How do you explain it? And yet there it is.
I know. And it didn't come from any of us. And it was only just a few of us in there investigating. So and none of us was a little girl. So
yeah,
I've caught quite a few different things like that. Which I really like it when I catch things.
Those are the nuggets of gold that you sieve for, aren't they?
Yes, it is.
You pan for those nuggets, and those are the ones that keep you coming back.
That's exactly it. Yes. So, our time is running right on by. You've been to Gettysburg quite a few times. You know that there's a house out on the battlefield that you can rent. For a night.
I'm slowly working my way through my dream spots in Gettysburg. So I go every year to support the Gettysburg Battlefield Bash, which is a wonderful charity event supporting the Wounded Warrior Foundation and childhood leukemia. And a lot of paranormal investigators go and we band together because we believe in that cause. And it's a great opportunity as well to go to the most haunted battlefield in the world. So I adore Gettysburg. I would live there in a heartbeat if I could.
Yeah,
I did the Fairfield Inn project the first time. The second time I did the Farnsworth House.
Right.
Which is also one of my favorite haunted places to stay in Gettysburg or anywhere. Love the Farnsworth. And then this year I'm working on a project that will cover the haunting of the orphanage and the Jenny Wade House.
All right. Was it you that did the one in the Farnsworth house about the mirror?
So I did. It appeared, I think, on the TV show Kindred Spirits.
Right.
And let's just say I see things differently than they do, and I'll leave that there. But I'd written about the mirror, and we had zero experiences with that mirror. We spent a lot of time down in that basement where the mirror is. Did get some strange things. I mean, I was jabbed in the back there, which was just incredible. And my colleague Anna was sitting behind me, and in fact, I was sitting there just doing an EVP session, and I felt very distinctly a finger, I hope it was a finger anyway, poke me in the back, and I turned around and gave her this foul look, and she looked at me like, what? Hadn't been her. But in terms of the mirror they have in the basement there, which is supposedly associated with the paranormal activity, I didn't find anything during my research. Doesn't mean there isn't a link just because I didn't find it, but that's my personal experience. The house itself, though, is very active, especially the Sarah Black room upstairs, which is directly underneath the attic. And the attic is where, during the battle, a nest of Confederate snipers basically harassed the Union lines on Cemetery Hill, which is just a little bit up the street. And it's believed that this is where the shot was fired, which killed Jenny Wade, the one civilian casualty of the Battle of Gettysburg. So I love that location. And people that are in the room below it often report the sounds of heavy footsteps on the attic floor, as if, soldiers wearing their hobnail boots, and the sound of heavy objects being dragged around up there when the attic's empty.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about that. Mirrors being portals, which I have yet to try to figure out how, other than they were used by mediums for scrying at some point in time. But I never have been able to figure out the portal part.
So mirrors are interesting, aren't they? There's a long history of their use, particularly for scrying in psychic research. My friend, old Linda, who's actually in the chat, she's very much into black mirrors. She makes them, she crafts them herself, and is experimenting with those. And she has a lot of luck with those mirrors that are black. But I've done scrying just once with a mirror, and for me at least, it was difficult to tell how much was my own eyes playing tricks. But I do know colleagues that have used mirrors for scrying, and they claim to have had some pretty interesting results with them. But the fascination with mirrors and their link, supposedly with spirit communication, goes back centuries, doesn't it?
Yes, goes way back.
It does indeed, and I have to say that I don't have a sufficient amount of experience to be any kind of skilled commentator on it. So my mind is open. The jury's still out as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I believe it's the Myrtle's plantation that has the mirrors with the fingerprints and the handprints in them, and it's lead glass, so I'm sure that part of it is just in the manufacturing process. But it's difficult to figure out weed out some of the actual physical reasons why things happen as opposed to the paranormal side of it.
It is. I mean, and my suspicion is that I'm very open to using anything that acts as a tool like that. There are so many different methods of spirit communication, or attempted, and mirrors are just one of them. I know that there's a lot of bias, for example, against talking boards, or I know people call them Ouija boards, but talking boards I think is a better generic term. I know some people that won't use them or flat won't allow them in their location. But I've never understood the belief that they are any more dangerous than scrying with a mirror or using a radio scanning device to try and communicate with spirits. All these techniques, whether technological or an object or just a mental technique, they're all attempts to open yourself up to something and communicate with it, aren't they?
True.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
So Robert Murch, who runs is the chairman of the Talking Board Historical Society, has his Talking Board Museum down in Denver. Robert's a good friend, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to go visit him along with some other investigators. And Robert's bathroom, he has 50-something Ouija boards, spirit boards. I keep saying Ouija. 50-something spirit boards on the wall of his bathroom. He has hundreds of these things on display in his house. So you would think that Robert's house should be ground zero for paranormal phenomena, right? If these boards are what some people fear they are, his house should be the biggest portal to the nether dimension that you can imagine.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so I asked him about it, and he said, no. Hi there, Nightfire, whoever you are, from the chat room. Robert's house should be so active. It should be, things should be flying off shelves and so on. I asked him and his husband, and they said, no, never had anything really strange like that associated with these boards at all. So,
yeah.
It fascinates me. It really does.
Yeah. I have 6 of them in the closet. Not a peep out of any of them.
Not a peep out of any of them, huh? There's so many different ways you can use things to communicate, supposedly, with the spirit world. My grandma and mom and all of them, they were from Kentucky, and they had all kinds of stuff that they would be tales that they'd be talking about, and they would take a candle and just let it be burning and ask a question and say, if the answer is yes, make the flame go tall. If it's no, make it grow short. And that candle flame will either go tall or it'll go short.
It's kind of interesting that back in the Victorian era, that used to be, and even the early part of the 20th century, that used to be a fairly common way of, I don't want to say entertaining yourself, but at night, it wasn't like you would sit in front of the TV. It wasn't at all unusual for families to break out the spirit board, and sit around it and try and communicate with their dead relatives. What I won't do is dismiss those people that have had strange or bad experiences and that are therefore wary of them. I respect that, and I think that each one needs to be treated with respect. When I use a spirit board, I still open it up and close it very carefully. And I will only communicate, I will expressly say, I'll only communicate with any entity that is of a good and decent, honest nature. Because I don't believe you should treat them lightly. But I don't think you should treat anything in the paranormal field lightly either.
No.
And so I don't believe they're any more dangerous than the other techniques that we use.
Which is true. That's true.
Yeah, generally, I think as an overall philosophy, if you come into this field with respect, it's a huge, huge safety measure. Treat the whole field and everyone and everything within it with respect, and you are 90% of the way towards a safe outcome.
Yes. I don't believe.
If you treat it like a scientific investigation, and you do so that method where you have to be open and honest about what happens, what doesn't happen, then that's the approach that has to happen here. Not it is sometimes you're right, it is a social event because you're around people that you genuinely care about.
Absolutely.
But the end result for everybody of that social event is learning something new.
It is, and also being respectful of the location, and being respectful of whatever spirits or entities might be there as well. I think that if you treat an automobile or a firearm or a knife or a hammer or anything without the due respect it deserves, it will harm you. It has the potential to harm you. So if, on the other hand, you do your research, your education, you keep a cool, clear, sober mind, then you can have a long and productive association with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I do not believe in provoking. You don't need to. You talk to them with respect, and you get more, I would say they communicate with you more readily.
You catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
Yes.
Although I kind of agree, if you're going to deal with a serial killer, they're the scum of the earth anyway.
Exactly. But especially when we investigate prisons, as we've done, you would be an idiot to walk onto an actual prison cell block and start throwing around attitude.
Right.
So,
yes.
just because there are no living people in the prison you're investigating, still, you want to treat that with the respect that it
With
deserves.
respect, yes.
If you've ever been to Alcatraz, that's one
it's
place.
on my bucket list. It's my number one bucket list location.
Trust me, you will go there with a lot of respect for what goes on there too.
Wow.
And you can feel it. Yeah.
Well, if I ever hit the lottery or something like that, I might would go out there with you.
One day I hope to, for sure.
Well, look, our time has just been flying by, and I want to take time to thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. Great topics, and you're just always a great guest, and it's the kind of guest we like. Ask one question and let you talk for 20 minutes.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'd like to thank not just you guys for inviting me, but all of the people that are listening in, and everyone that's interacting in the chat room too. And I'm seeing some different opinions, and I'm seeing people disagree for the most part respectfully, and I really think that's cool. We're all the same kind of people, right? We're all the same kind of tribe, because we all have questions about this kind of thing. And I just love the fact that you guys would take the time to come be a part of this tonight. So thank you so much. It was wonderful spending time with you tonight.
And I want to give you a minute or so to tell people what you're up to next, and where people can follow you and get in contact with you if they would like to.
And where to find your books.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, let's see. Currently, I'm on Haunted Hospitals, which airs on Saturday nights here in the States on the Travel Channel. Canada, it's on T&E, I believe. New season of Paranormal 911 should start in March. I don't have an exact date yet, but I hear that it's coming. You can find my books primarily at Amazon.com or any of the Amazon stores, but also in brick-and-mortar bookstores as well. Come see me over at richardestep.net on the internet, or come say hi at my Richard Estep author page on Facebook. I love talking with people that have this same interest. I really do. So thank you again so much. It's been a genuine pleasure being with all of you tonight.
That's great. And we always, like I say, appreciate having you come on. Maybe sometime, have you got any plans for anything in Ohio this year?
I just got back from Ohio on Monday. I was at the Bel Air House.
At the Bel Air House, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd like to get back there because that place was extremely active. Highly recommended if you're an investigator looking for a genuine case.
That's over there on the eastern part of Ohio.
It is.
And I live over here on the western side. So,
yeah, I don't know if I'll get out to the western side this year. I'm never quite sure where my travels will take me, but you never know.
Well, I know there's a place called Post Town School. A lot of people's done that. That's not that far from me, just maybe 20 miles. So it is now. So, but I've been there quite a few times. They have events there. I think they got one coming up in September, I believe, for a weekend. So if you ever get a chance, let them know, and or let me know if you're ever going to be over in that area.
I sure will.
Mansfield, have you been there?
It's on my bucket list again. Mansfield Reformatory you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah, it's on my bucket list. I've yet to go there. I would love to.
I've been there one time, and I was like on a private tour. The guy took us to places where a lot of the people don't get to go to. And,
that's cool.
It was real interesting. It's a big place. Yeah.
Well, my next case and project will be I'll be going to the UK in early April, all being well, and I'll be moving into a castle on the coast for a few days, a castle that's built on plague pits. And I've never lived in a castle before, so I'm really looking forward to that. And also a World War II Royal Air Force airfield I'll be investigating as well.
Wow, now that would be interesting to do.
Wait, a castle built on plague pits?
Yeah.
Wow.
Huh. Yeah, it promises to be an interesting few days. I didn't tell my wife about the plague pits until I'd arranged to stay, though.
Oops.
Which probably makes me a bad husband. But how often do you get to say you're the lord and lady of a castle for 3 days?
There you go. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of interesting places over in England, so maybe next time we can talk about a lot more of those things over there. Scotland.
I would be delighted to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, again, our time has run out, and if you stay on for a minute, we'll thank you as soon as we get off. So, we'll see you next week at the same time. Our guest next week is going to be Tabby Cat, so join us with that. Appreciate it. And let's see here what else I got coming up. I guess that's about all the time I got for. So, this is Henry Foister.
And Barbara Duncan.
And we will see you next week at the same time. So, good night, everybody.
Good night.
You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.